I suppose I should say something about all that flag waving going on in the country. Which flags do I support? Actually, I support none of it because a position is ideological, and the ideology in question, the ideologies in question need to be defined properly. So, and the proper symbolism chosen for it. Yes, we can all recognize the Union flag, but is it enough? Today, there's some sort of Zionist concert with some Hebrew singing somewhere near Parliament with a lot of Union flags being waved. So obviously the flag of the British is being used by two different parties disputing what should properly be British identity. The Zionists and those who are anti-Zionist. Now, on the question of Zionism, I have repeatedly tried to explain to Muslims that Allah is a Zionist in the sense that he is forever talking about them in the Quran, and in a verse in the Quran, he actually says that Jews are to go to Israel in the end times if they're not already there. And this is consistent with Jewish Zionism and Christian Zionism, which is about okay, let me start again about Zionism. Zionism is the idea that Jews deserve a homeland, and people apart from Jews also think that. So you would expect Jews to want a homeland if they don't have one, and you would also expect Gentiles to support them. And Gentiles who don't agree with it. But in reality, Jews can only rely on Gentile support of Zionism in order to establish a homeland. Currently, they are relying on Christians. So Israel at the moment is run under the rules of Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism has an agenda of converting Jews to Christianity to hurry the coming of the Messiah. So non-secular Jews, i.e. religious Jews who take their religion seriously, do not support the idea of Jews being converted to Christianity, because according to Jews who take their religion seriously, Christianity is idolatry and would endanger their afterlife. Approximately half of Jewry is secular, so this is a problem for Jews to sort out between themselves, I suppose. But actually, Gentiles would have a massive influence on which group of Jews wins the debate, because Jews basically have to choose between competing groups of Gentiles for support of a Jewish homeland, what I notice is that Christians already are known for supporting a Jewish homeland, and as I was saying earlier, they in fact run Israel. But what about Muslims? Muslims also could claim to be Zionists, but from my experience of speaking to them, they are easily triggered by any mention of Zionism, because they automatically equate it with unadulterated evil. And when I point out that chapter 17, verse 104 of the Quran actually supports Islamic Zionism, I don't get a sensible reply. All I get are incoherent answers that they refuse to explain when I ask them for clarification. So there is a bit of a problem. So back to the demonstration, the concert, or whatever you call it, at Westminster. Let me just check what it is, because I only saw it on a video clip on Twitter. Concert, rally, Westminster, Parliament, pro-Zionist, because there was definitely some singing in Hebrew. So it was yesterday, Sunday. It says here, police arrest almost 900 at London protests supporting a band group Palestine Action. We see a picture of an elderly man being carried by police. This was taken yesterday. So, amongst UK citizens, there is disagreement amongst them about whether Britain should be Zionist. But then there are many different kinds of Zionism, and we know that from right to left, politicians who have spoken on the matter have gotten into trouble. Now, we know that Ken Livingstone got himself into trouble for saying that, or implying, I can't remember exactly what he said now, but he was saying that it is possible to not like Jews and still be a Zionist. Because he was saying that the Nazis did do a deal with the Mufti of Jerusalem about which Jews they could send over to Israel, or the land of Israel as it then was. So this is something we should bear in mind, that just because you are Zionist does not mean that you like Jews. I have joked more than once that Ben Gurion Airport could easily be called Adolf Hitler Airport, because Jews owe so much to Hitler in getting their homeland. Imagine if the Holocaust had not happened, then they wouldn't have got their homeland, would they? Because nobody would think it was just to displace all those Palestinians to make room for those Jews to arrive. from Europe and America, and also from Russia. But really, the problem with Israel is that it is a secular state. Religious Jews are not really welcome there, particularly if they're over childbearing or fighting age. But if you want to live in Israel, you could convert to Judaism through Reform Judaism and get there and start living in Israel. It is as easy as that. And of course, that has annoyed religious Jews who have always regarded Reform Jews as heretical Jews. But what can they do about it? Well, nothing really, because it is Western media that controls the terms of discourse, and most people don't really care that religious Jews who want to retire to Israel to be in touch with their Jewish roots are routinely turned away, and only men of fighting age and women of childbearing age are welcome at the drop of a hat, provided they can produce vaguely Jewish credentials. Because the point of this is to populate the American colony of Israel with people capable of fighting the Arabs. And that is really the point of it. What does this make Israel then? Of course, it makes Israel an American colony. What does it make Britain? It makes Britain a US vassal state obliged to support the American position, whatever it is. And this state of being a US vassal extends to all European members of NATO. Now, do most Europeans know this? I suspect not. And they're not going to be told by Western media because it is an inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth is that there are basically three kinds of white people. There are the Americans, who are the first tier, high status white people, and then there are the Europeans, who are the vassal state, whose countries are vassal states of America if they are members of NATO, and then there are the Australasians, who are vassal states of a vassal state. They would be vassal states of a US vassal state, i.e. Britain, because really Australia, Canada, and New Zealand are technically still British. Now, not many political commentators mention this, so not many people know this, and when you try to tell them, they get very upset with you, because I guess it is almost akin to telling somebody that, their parents are not really their parents, they were adopted, or they were, they are in fact illegitimate, and all kinds of dark family secrets will not be acknowledged readily. But it is nevertheless the case that countries with a long history of Christianity will have accumulated a very large cupboard full of skeletons that the ruling classes do not want do not want the governed to know about and think too much about, because it is fundamentally disturbing for them and angering and, well, traumatizing, really. But in order to address the identitarian issues of the British, we must exorcise these demons and have a proper conversation about it that will not be abruptly ended by frightened politicians. And this I encourage everybody to do because it is important for Western identity and Westerners, and by this I include even non-white people who have crossed oceans and continents to get to the West. If they don't like it there, they can leave, but the point is, if they want to stay, they need to understand Western history and even how they came to be economic migrants. As for the people who are already there, they would need to understand their own history and the foreign policy of their government and the wars they fought and the consequences of those wars that they fought. Obviously, for Europeans, their hegemony disappeared after they couldn't stop fighting amongst themselves and cause the center of Western power to move from Europe to America. So now America is now kicking them around and they need to understand the consequences of this and what they could be doing about it if they wish to do anything about it. By not discussing it properly, they will only cause their trauma to deepen and delay the solution, which is to draw a line under the mistakes of the past and put their best foot forward in terms of how they are going to govern themselves. Now, with regard to British identity, there are many aspects. You can call Britain an island, you can call it a democracy, a monarchy, a representative democracy, an island nation, etc., a former global empire. But what is also relevant is whether the British regard themselves as a vassal state of America or part of Europe. And I suppose what is giving the British ruling classes a problem is their desire to attach themselves to a much more powerful country than the EU, which is also controlled by America. So unless these questions are properly discussed, the British will not have a coherent or attractive identity, and waving any number of flags with Israel or St. George or the Union Jack or any of that is merely displacement therapy. Nothing will be resolved, even if more roads are painted over and more flags are put up, because it will not fundamentally address the issue of why people want to wave the flag in that way. And so we come back to the issue of how the British consider themselves. And really the only thing that they can change is their religion and their political system. Now, Britain is Christian, Anglican, in fact, because it is Anglicanism that defends the divine right of the British monarch to rule. But this divine right to rule is only important if the current British monarch is an absolute monarch, and we know he isn't. So why would we fight hard about any of this? So why would we fight over two anachronisms, really? Because the constitutional monarchy that we now have is really a remnant of the absolute monarchy that Britain used to be. When did Britain stop being an absolute monarchy? It's actually quite hard to pinpoint, since even kings had to occasionally consult Parliament, and if they didn't do it often enough, they would find themselves executed, as Charles I was. I have been pointing out that the constitutional monarchy is really the product of regicide. I've had a few exchanges with Grok on the subject, and Grok apparently doesn't completely agree, but it sees a connection, really, that no king would willingly become a constitutional monarchy unless the alternative were regicide. And that, I think, is a very easy point to make. Now, do we need a monarchy? I think there's a bit of sentiment in all of this, and it could just be that people just like the idea of a king or queen because they like the idea of princes and princesses, and the media likes writing about them. But is it necessary, or is it even a bad thing? I would say it is. I used to be a monarchist, though, and I know a lot of people around the world are quite fond of the British royal family, and watching them being played by actors in The Crown doubtless helps the cause of the British royal family. But should anyone, even the British monarch, not be able to exercise their First Amendment rights? I would say no. You would have a very stunted experience if you didn't feel you could discuss religion with anyone and be made to pay for expressing political opinions, whether right or wrong. And since there is no purpose in having a monarch anymore, because, well, what was a monarch for? In the olden days, it was to lead his army into war, and presumably he would be the bravest of all the men in war because he would be leading his army and saying charge, and obviously the first man to go would be, well, in danger. And if you got killed, I guess your whole army would disappear, or maybe not. If the barons felt brave enough, I guess if the king felt they could take over and become king, maybe that was how it was all done. I am only speculating. But the point of having a king is is now redundant because warfare is not conducted in this way. So there is no need, therefore, for a king to be the representative of the country, because it is quite simply cruel to put somebody in a goldfish bowl or a gilded cage. I know for many people who envy the royal family that they wouldn't regard being put in a gilded cage and a goldfish bowl as in any way oppressive, but I know I would hate it and not be able to see the point of it. And I think in my lifetime, King Charles, as Prince of Wales, has said words to the effect that he didn't quite see the point of being an Anglican. He didn't want to be a defender of the faith. He wanted to be the defender of the faith of his subjects, who are not really his they're not called UK citizens. It is actually quite confusing if you use the wrong word. If you have a king, you would have subjects. If they're not your subjects, and what is the point of having a king? If you are monarch and you have fewer rights than your subjects, who are not called subjects but citizens, then what is the point? What is the point of being a monarch at all? And what is the point of being monarch? What is the political purpose of it? Well, the Americans have found the British Empire, what remains of it, to be usefully represented by the British monarch. They can push through all kinds of things in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada without consulting them. And they are too sentimental to question the role of the British monarch in how and how it affects their government. Because really, these places do not have an independent foreign policy at all. So there are many things the British ought to be considering about their current identity. Of course, we all have an identity. The problem is always the nature of that identity, which we accept or reject if it's very unattractive. Currently, the status of British identity is not particularly attractive. And that, I think, is the cause of all this flag waving. The people are discontented. They do not see the point of supporting Israel, and probably they've always hated the Jews. It's a feature of Christian identity to call Jews a synagogue of Satan, to blame them for all kinds of things. And probably Muslims are no different. I will be appearing in the Rashma show at 4 p.m. So this is my advertisement of it, and you will find a link in the description. Hopefully, I will have a chance to discuss all these issues with Rashma and possibly her guests. But I guess this is a trial run for me to discuss the issue of British identity and to invite you all to go over to the Rashma show at 4 p.m. British Summer Time. Thank you for your attention.